Well, I guess it depends on how you want to look at it. If you're making something to work perfectly with a slider, it's going to look a little bit differently than if you want it to bounce nicely. So, one thing to think about if you're going to do any kind of like boob stuff, um, something that I've been thinking about is you can't really move. Like somebody asked me before to do an animation for boobs, and it worked really well. I did it, it worked really well. But then as soon as she released it, she found out right away that it suffers from the same thing that the face sliders suffer from, and that is that the cleavage and buoyancy sliders use bone translation. So you can't really do like an animated boob because of the buoyancy and cleavage sliders. You'll mess those up. So one way around this, though, that I was thinking about was to rig the boob to the boob attachment, to the attachment point. If you rig the boob to the attachment point, then you could animate the attachment point without interfering with the cleavage slider or buoyancy slider. I haven't actually tried it, but as I was exporting something today and I had some problems, I was kind of looking around and had an option right there in our Avastor export options to export with attachment points or meshes attached to attachment points.
I was just thinking about you, Kathy.
Is that good or bad?
Oh, it's good. Did you get any help from on that idea that you had?
What idea? Oh, you mean the animation thing?
Yeah, yeah, you said that it. I think.
Oh, wait a minute, no. Oh, wait a minute. The rigging thing? The.
Yes, and required a viewer change.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of people, and yeah, that's not going to happen. But we're basically at the bone limit right now, and if we were to try to add more rigging points or anything like that, which basically is adding more bones, there's just not going to happen because we're already at the limit. Maybe in a couple of years, but if we add any more bones to the skeleton, even as in attachment points, because attachment points are basically bones. If we even add attachment points, what will happen is the low-end computers will not be able to run Second Life basically anymore. So yeah, we're already at that limit. So yeah, it ain't gonna happen. Tried. Hey there.
Hey, Kathy, how's it going?
Oh, okay, just having lunch while we're having the meeting.
Alright, well, we might as well go ahead and get started. Let's see, we've been talking for a while about some potential upcoming projects, and we do have an announcement about that. We are starting work on doing bakes on mesh. It's something that people have been asking for quite a while. You know, the ability to apply your baked avatar meshes to mesh models, and so we're going to be starting on that. The first part of getting that to work is it's a little bit of a detour because we have to dive into the baking service, and we have to change the baking service to allow 1024 squared images. So since we haven't touched the baking service in quite a while, that's going to be a bit of an initial dive to get that working before we can really get working on the bakes on mesh proper. But once we have that, then we have the I think the key infrastructure that we need to move forward with actually allowing these textures to be applied onto mesh objects, which is probably a bit smaller than in some respects than actually dealing with the ins and outs of the baking service. So anyway, we'll keep you posted on that. As I say, the first part of this is just kind of running off and weighing on the baking service, so there's not going to be too much user visible stuff going on for a while, but we'll let you know how that goes. The exact specs for how the bakes on mesh are going to work haven't really been established yet. We don't have kind of a blow-by-blow feature description of that, but clearly the goal there is to address the kinds of concerns we've had about wanting to be able to reuse those textures and wanting to be able to modify the appearance of meshes without having them be full perm and that sort of thing. So so we'll keep you posted on that. Just getting started now, so there's not really anything to look at, but we'll tell you how it goes. Let's see what else is going on. We've had the Asset HTTP viewer in QA for a while. I think that should be coming out fairly soon, but again, you don't really know till it ships. But currently, that's I think next in line for release. So we'll see how that one goes. Let's see. Tapple asks what Omega is. No. What is Omega? Yeah, I remember using omega in equations, but I assume that's not the context. Plier system, okay. Yeah, I know there's I know there are plier systems, but I don't know anything about that one in particular. Yeah. Anyway, the hope is that we won't need to do as much applying, if we enable bakes on mesh. The idea being that you could, basically, since your bake texture is put together from the various things that you're wearing, that you can modify the appearance of a mesh by changing what your bake looks like without having to change the mesh itself. Anyway, we'll see how that all goes. So what else? Asset HTTP, hoping it'll come out soon. Still in RC. The last viewer update had some mate changes that I'm not the person with all the details on, but I know that there were some bug fixes, improvements there. Let's see. So I guess that is all I have for official commentary this week. If anybody has questions, we can chat about whatever. Yeah, supplemental animations are part of the project I'm working on now, which is animated meshes or animated objects and supplemental animations. I just started working on the server side of that, so we've got some changes needed to support flagging objects as being of an animatable type, and then some work to enable the new LSL commands that'll be needed for that. There's new LSL for there'll be new LSL for supplemental animations and new LSL for animating objects. So just starting to look at the LSL side of things now. Yeah, baking probably doesn't involve materials currently because none of the other things that go into baking support materials, right? It's all based on compositing the textures that you have in your wearables and using that to generate a resultant image. So basically, it's just generating a diffuse texture. It doesn't know about the other types. How many animations are going to be limited per motion? Yeah, I mean, we haven't looked at changing any of the current limits, but it's possible that we would have something where you can, only be animating X number of animations at a time on a given object. We'll have to do some testing on that once we're closer to having something to look at.
I have a question.
Yep, fire away.
Sorry, I gotta get my phone.
Well, I'll just say it's probably not best to limit the amount of animations, maybe like the amount of animation data. That can have like 100 animations that are only using up, less than a megabyte.
Well, that's true. I think there actually is some kind of a limit now, where you can only have 64 motions playing at one time or something like that. I've never actually tested that, but I've seen that showing up in log files, so I assume that's getting enforced at some level. But yeah, I guess just the number by itself doesn't necessarily tell you how much overhead you're imposing. Yeah, I'm not sure where the 64 limit is. Is that a limit per per avatar or something like that? Per agent, yeah.
Even with Bento, like this cat, I have like a crazy amount of animations playing, but I mean, I think 6 is crazy. 64 is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, for most of these things you have to set some limit, just because you can be pretty sure that whatever the limit is, somebody's going to be pushing up against it. But yeah, I can't think of a lot of cases where you'd really need to have more than 64. Obviously, somebody has, considering that this is something that shows up fairly often in the log files.
And that is the craziness that is Second Life. Somebody actually tried to play 64 animations at once.
Of course. When you guys were doing the whole bento thing, and I'm really sad that I didn't know anything about it until recently. Did you try scaling the skeleton down? I know it will only scale so far, and is there a specific reason for that, or could it be done?
I mean, there's not any technical reason that the skeleton couldn't be scaled by other amounts. The limitation that I know of currently is that the size slider works within a certain range. Right, so there's a certain interpretation of the various possible values that the slider can have, what that means in terms of the scale that gets applied to the skeleton. You couldn't really change the definition of the slider because it would break the stuff that's already out there. It would in principle be possible to do some kind of additional scaling if we'd find another slider or some other mechanism, but that's not something we've really looked at. It wasn't that wasn't actually modified for bento at all. Just
the reason why I
did some changes to the just a second. I think we did some changes to the size slider just to get it to scale some of the new bones, but we didn't change the behavior on the old bones.
The reason why I ask is because I've noticed that the face bones for bento, the bento face bones, all of the sliders work really well up to like a certain small size, and then after that they don't work anymore. So I mean, I don't know how these things work, but I was just thinking, well, that kind of coincides with the size of the avatar. You've always been able to shrink it down to a certain size, and that's it, and that's the limit. So I was just wondering, maybe if that slider was opened up a little bit more so that you could shrink it down more, then possibly the bento face bones might actually work at a smaller skeleton.
Yeah, so where have you been seeing issues with the face bones? This is when you scale the whole skeleton kind of up toward the high end of the range, or beyond that?
Well, I don't have a specific size number, but if you scale the skeleton down past a certain size, then the face bones for bento, the sliders do not work. It's a common thing. Yeah, Mondoon and Kathy know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, tinies, petite avatars, etc. You basically have to upload it without joint positions, and then unfortunately the mesh kind of breaks a little bit and it's not as smooth.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that's all going to interact. You've got a bunch of sliders that are modifying, scales as well as positions. So, the combined effect there isn't necessarily going to scale up or down, smoothly through kind of an arbitrary range of scales. Really all I can say is we haven't experimented with trying to see if we can push it farther. We didn't change the definition of the height slider because that would break stuff that's already out there. And if we were looking to add some other mechanism for for supporting a wider range of sizes, an additional global scale slider, something like that, we would have to do some investigation into how that worked with the sliders that are already there.
Yeah, I was going to say, Matrice and I looked into this particular thing of scaling the avatar up completely bigger or smaller. And I remember we talked about this a long time ago. So we would have to add another slider to the appearance slider for a global scale. It would actually be a fairly easy thing to do. It's just that there are a couple things. One, we're pretty close to the limit on the number of sliders that you can have in the appearance slider. I think you're down to like maybe 2 more that could possibly be added to the appearance sliders before we reached our absolute limit, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think currently we're sending these things as I think currently the way you have it represented, you can only have up to 255 sliders or something like that. User controllable ones, and we're pretty much at that limit now.
Yeah, I think.
So
I remember we're like.
Yeah, at some point, trying to add anything would cause you to have to actually, change how this stuff gets communicated to the viewer, and you got to make back-end changes and all that stuff too. So it could get hairy pretty fast.
Yeah, if I remember right, Oz. If I remember, Oz was at the meeting that we had the discussion, and he said, yeah, we only had like 1 or 2 sliders more that we could actually add before hitting our limit, and so he wanted to sort of, if I remember correctly, wanted to sort of not leave those for future use in case something really cool happened to where we really needed to use them. The slider itself would be very easy. I can make it within a half hour. It's a very, very simple. It's just like the head size slider. It's the same, just adding all the bones. And you can have the avatar scale down to 1 inch tall, to 1 centimeter tall if you want, to all the way up to 64 meters if we wanted to have it go all the way up to 64 meters or even bigger. The other problem that we ran into that we were talking about is, yeah, you can make the avatar bigger or smaller with just using a slider, and it just changes the scales, and everything should pretty much work. The problem that we really determined was, no matter what size the slider would be set at, your avatar, when it took a single step, would move the same distance. So if you had a little tiny avatar and you took 1 step, it would look like it shoots across the room at 100 miles an hour, relative size. Or if you had a 64 meter tall avatar and you took 1 step, it would look like it hardly moved at all. I mean, the animation would play and it would look like it, but it would. So we would need to have something that would actually change the step size of the avatar when it moves. So it would. Yeah. So it would mean more than just adding a slider. Adding the slider to scale it up and down in the avatar LAD would be actually very simple and can be done within a half hour. It's the other stuff of having the avatar change how it moves per step to scale up and down, which would be extra work.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is some code for trying to keep your steps kind of synced with the ground when you're walking, but I think that's only going to help within a fairly narrow range of sizes. It's not going to cause you to, take 100 steps a second when you're a tiny, and even if it did, it would look crazy. So yeah, we actually would have to change, kind of how far you move per unit of time, which is something that's handled on the back end and probably ties into the physics and everything. When you were experimenting with this, what were you changing? Were you just scaling the pelvis, or were you scaling kind of multiple bones along the chain?
Okay, what basically I did it the same way you do the head size slider, which is you take all the bones that you want to scale and you put them in there and you change them all by the same amount. And so it's actually very simple. So it only affects the scale of the bones, and it's very simple one to program. It's like I said, but you would end up with you'd have to add every single bone, you know, the collision bones and the normal bones and the bento bones, all in that one slider, and then you just have them scale up or down the same amount. So it's very simple to do. It's just, you know, like I said, I could probably do it within a half hour in the Avatar lab, but then it's the other stuff that would be making the Avatar move. It'd be really cool, because then you could have a dollhouse, and you could have it where you scale down to the size of a dollhouse. So people who have a very small piece of land, they could have a house that is actually very small, and make their small piece of land look huge. You know, so
it would increase your prim limit any, so.
Right, and if you think about it, you know, if you have a very small house, you could keep your LODs very low, so it's not seen from very far away. So it would actually kind of probably help with lag. Since you have a tiny house, it's not going to be visible from very far away, so it would actually be pretty cool.
I'm just trying to get to a baby size, from toddler to a baby. That's all I'm trying to do.
Right, but if you could scale down, say, the Avatar to, you know, say Ethra over here, the size of her, but be a normal size skeleton, since you're not moving the face bones, it's just being scaled down. You don't have to worry about trying to move. See, I have a number of customers who are doing custom avatars, and they're doing different size avatars, and some of them are doing children, some of them are doing babies, and when you get down to a certain size, you can't leave the bones in their default bone positions for the face, so you have to start moving the bones around, and then as soon as you start moving the bones around, you lose the sliders that are using translations, because anytime you use a custom bone position, and you upload it to Second Life with custom bone positions, those sliders that were affecting that bone that were using translations no longer affect the bone. Only the scales do. But if you scale the Avatar down to a smaller size, like say you know, a toddler or a very small person or a small child, the bones, you would still be in the default bone position. You know, and so you wouldn't need to move the bones to custom bone positions. And so then, even on a very small avatar, the sliders would still work completely, even if it was an avatar that was only an inch tall. So it has some very good things. You know, it would, you know, I think it would be an awesome thing to have.
Yeah, of course you can change yourself to any size you want using animations, but it doesn't play nicely with the sliders. So, you know, if we had a way to do that, that'd be cool.
Right, in animation you could make yourself any size, but yeah, it would override, the animation would override the sliders that use translations. Right. Yeah, somebody said, yeah, the animations, yeah, to try, I've done this. I've made a small avatar moving the bones manually, you know, and yeah, you can get a little tiny avatar, but yeah, when you play an animation, because the animations are absolute animations, your avatar takes off like a bat out of heck. You know, it moves all over the place. Because yeah, animations don't scale down, so you'd have to make your own animations, unless the animation was only using rotation only. If you're doing animations with rotation only, then those play just fine on whatever size avatar you're using.
Yeah, well, that's true. The rotations don't give you as much flexibility, but they minimize the risk of conflict because sliders don't touch rotation, and if animations don't touch scale and position, then it's a lot cleaner. I had a question about having an LSL function to request baking arbitrary textures. Yeah, I think that's probably out of scope for the, bakes on mesh, which is really about applying, the bake textures we already have. But it's conceivable. It's something we'd talk about at some point. I'm not sure exactly how that would work. In the sense that, like, what are you going to do with the results? Like, if your bake textures aren't actually stored the same place and don't behave the same way as just the regular textures that are, it's off in the asset store. So you actually have to know that you're requesting a bake texture as opposed to a regular texture. So if you do a bake texture batch, what do you get? Do you get a persistent texture that's stored in the asset store, or do you get some kind of a handle to a temporary thing that's similar to the bake textures that we have now? Okay, so I mean, how temporary is it? You know that, like with bake textures, you know that they're obsolete after your current outfit folder version gets bumped. In the case of something where somebody just requested, hey, go bake this stuff, then I'm not sure what the sort of logical lifespan is there. Yeah, I'm not sure how the temp textures work. Yeah, I'm not really sure what the impediments would be, because I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but it does seem like you could potentially get some additional flexibility if you had the ability to request kind of arbitrary bakes like that. Yeah, I mean, one thing to note about the existing baking service is that it actually gives you a fair amount of flexibility. It's got this notion of kind of different body regions. So it has a texture for the upper body and a texture for the lower body and a texture for the head and so forth. But if you had the ability to say that an arbitrary face of an arbitrary mesh wanted to use the head texture, it doesn't really have to be a head texture anymore. It's just whatever you get from compositing the various textures in the things you're wearing that think they're head textures, right? So, in principle, you could use head-based wearables to define your wing textures or whatever. It's obviously it's a little confusing if you do that. It's the viewer isn't really helping you keep track of what's going on, but it seems like at least in principle you could you could do something like that once you have, even bakes on mesh that just use the current bake textures.
If you're talking about what I think you're talking about, that still works. I use it all the time. Are you talking about the local textures in the build menu or something else?
Yeah, our baking service really only knows how to deal with textures from one source, which is the the clothing and body part items that you have equipped. So the textures get pulled out of those and composited into a kind of a special texture that then you can retrieve from the baking service.
So would the new NPC system be able to use the baking too? Or
well, that's an
animated
interesting.
objects?
That's an interesting question. We would have to figure out how to get it working for actually attached objects first. If you're dealing with an object that's not attached, I guess the first question is whose texture is it supposed to show? Would that also be using your avatar's bakes, or would it be like trying to generate its own bake somehow?
Well, if you created the bake, though, couldn't you apply that bake to anything?
You're talking about with a new LSL function, or talking about the bake textures that you already get with your avatar.
No, I just mean theoretically. Theoretically, like if I had a human NPC and I bake some textures on my own avatar, couldn't I just transfer it over to the NPC?
That would be one way to do it. I think you do have the problem of texture lifetime, right? Currently your baked textures basically are valid for as long as you haven't changed your appearance. So if you've got something wandering around that isn't actually you that's trying to use those textures, how do you manage the lifetime issue? Polysale is pointing out that this, being able to explicitly bake arbitrary lists of textures would be another way to approach this. I think a third thing you could potentially do would be to actually have a notion of something like a current outfit in a in an animated object, right? You can have inventory inside objects, so another possibility would be to say, okay, you take the baking service and allow it to look inside one of these animated objects, pull out the currently worn items, and generate a bake from that's specific to that object. That's again, all of these are speculative. They're not part of a spec for anything we're currently working on, but there are probably a few different ways you could go with that.
Definitely not in the scope of this project, though. The new project.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we're trying to get working with animated objects is just the animating the objects part. But once we're there, then we can kind of take stock of how things are working and what the highest value next step is if we have the resources for it. ETA is when it's ready. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of having, actually doing bakes for the animated objects, because then you've got some kind of logical answer about the lifetime, right? When objects need to be rebaked as well, and so then you can expire the textures and get rid of the old ones. Oh, bye, Troy. Glad you come by. Where is animated objects feature right now? Yeah, I mean, I've done some prototype work with just, hacking up the viewer to say, okay, animate this object using this animation. And, that part isn't too hard to get working. The bit we're looking at now is making it work in an actual, shared experience sense, where the things you're doing in your viewer are visible to other people. So, there's simulator work needed there, and of course there's LSL changes needed to add the actual scripting commands. So, obviously we have to get those bits working too before there's anything to make a project viewer out of. Question about will there be limits? There will be limits. We don't know what they are yet because we don't know the performance impact yet. At a minimum, there's going to be some kind of a land impact calculation that reflects something about the expected cost of having an animated object. But there could be other types of limits in terms of how many you could have simultaneously or that sort of thing. Oh yeah, we reopened 2027 a little while ago. I think there was a request to add some more comments, so if anybody wants to put anything else in there, they can. Yeah, I mean, I doubt we would change the avatar limits for a region based on how many animated objects there were. Obviously that could be dicey if person A can make a bunch of animated objects and that stops person B from being able to res themselves. So it's more likely that those would be managed separately. Would we need to make the 64 motion limit stricter? Yeah, possibly. As Medu says, even allowing 64 animations on regular agents seems kind of high. I'd be curious if anybody has any kind of real use cases for needing a very large number of animations.
At that high number, you'd almost be animating each bone independently. It'd have to be like some kind of a tool or something.
Yeah, I think there are kind of posers and things out there that basically do generate, one animation per bone. And if you're trying to use those in combination, then you could potentially get a really big number.
Well, if the animations were only like 1 second long and you wanted 60 seconds of animation, then somebody might do the 64 limit. I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of.
Yeah, well, it's true that the total number of bones went up a lot with bento. So if someone was trying to animate, bone by bone, then it could add up pretty fast. But yeah, it's always easier to start low and raise it if you have to than to try to reduce it after the fact.
Really, for avatars, even with bento, with like this cat has probably 7 animations playing at once. Probably less, but at its max. I mean, if you're going more than that, I mean, like I said, you'd have to be using some kind of tool.
Is your cat out in the marketplace now or under construction?
This cat is not mine. I'm making it for Zuby. I guess they have a cat on the marketplace now, but it's not bento.
Oh, okay.
So this is their bento version. And we're probably a month out.
How many total animations do you think you'd wind up doing for a project like that?
Something like this. What we're doing is going to use a ton of animation. So I don't know that many people would do something like we're going to do, because the cat's going to have all kinds of toys and all kinds of different things, food, you name it. A basic avatar might have around 100 animations with AO and maybe a bunch of tricks.
Katawa has released a singing animations for their bento heads.
Yeah, it really seems like the scenario where you have a ton of animations playing at once is something where you're trying to kind of roll your own animations out of constituent motions rather than just play a kind of a combined thing.
I mean, even with something like this cat, which has all these animations, I'll bet, I mean, the vast majority of these animations are no more than, 50 kilobytes or something like that. All of the animations loaded into your cache is no less than a megabyte, easily. Now, if we're talking about humans and motion capture, yeah, one motion capture can be a megabyte or a couple megabytes.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a size limit for animations now of... We did raise it. I think it's 250 K. That's for the size of a single, .anim gets uploaded.
Oh, right. I mean, I'm talking mostly about raw motion capture files
Okay,
that
sure.
you have to break up and then bring into Second Life.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we raised the 120K limit to 250 for Bento, since people need to animate more bones now. There was a question in the text a little ways back about the cost of animating with bones versus flexies. I don't have any numbers on that. The general experience we've had is that flexies are pretty inefficient. I think generally you're going to do better using kind of current animation techniques instead. But I don't have any numbers to hand on that. So how many animations is this big bug robot thing using? Yeah, we've had questions about sort of generalized IK come up a few times. Has anybody filed a JIRA about that yet? Yeah, if we had a JIRA that gave more details about exactly what people are looking for, was a place that folks could comment on what they're looking for, I think that would be helpful. Obviously there's a lot of different ways you could pursue that sort of thing. Yeah. Question about things attached to HUDs. Yeah, HUDs are basically only visible in your own viewer. They kind of live in screen space, like they're kind of pasted to your view of the world rather than being in the world. So that's kind of by design. I don't know. I don't know what the cases where you'd want to have them work, have them be visible in world, or what that would mean would be.
I am totally confused of what you're talking about, George. I make HUDs all the time that communicate with clothing. Interesting idea, though, but the scripts are not all that laggy, I don't think. Some of them are quite good, in fact.
All right. Well, I guess we're about at time for this week. So thanks for coming by, and we will keep you posted on all the latest doings. No meeting next week because we have our usual conflicting internal meeting the same time. But we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Awesome. Thanks.
Tapple asks, yeah, it would be fine to add a JIRA about that, and if you want to request to leave it open for comments for a little while, that's fine too. You might want to send me a pointer to it just so I know it's there. If we made all your wishes come true, then you wouldn't have to come back next week. You know, we gotta keep you on the hook. All right, bye everybody.
Bye, dear. Thanks again. See you in 2 weeks.
Wow, big news today. Lots of big news.
Yeah, definitely. I was hoping that they were going to do the baked textures. That was my favorite.
I was afraid because we were working on, animated objects, they wouldn't get to baked textures. But I think they see how important it is, for both. And, animated objects and...
Right. From what I understand, the big textures isn't going to be that particularly big of a deal in that the texture's already baked down to a single texture that gets to apply to your avatar. It's just a matter of applying that to another mesh. The only other thing to figure out with the big textures is how do we hide the avatar? How do you hide the avatar? Is the only thing that has to really be figured out. Because if you hide the avatar with an alpha, where you make the whole avatar invisible, that makes the whole big texture invisible. So there's nothing to apply onto the mesh. So I think Veer is leaning towards adding another alpha, so that you'd have one alpha to hide the avatar, and then the second alpha which we already have. The current alpha to hide whatever you need it to hide on the mesh that's being the texture being applied to.
Actually, I think both projects are, they're not bento. Let's put it that way. They're not bento. They're not going to take 2 years to do. We're not adding all this stuff to, because even animated objects, I think they're going to do it pretty quickly.
Right. Well, the big bento took an extra 6 months to get out the door, if not longer, simply because of all the complexity of adding the appearance sliders to the face bones. I mean, bento could have been out easily 6 months sooner, but it was so important to get the face bones to work with the sliders and they were just took forever. It was a lot of work to get those to work, so that was part of the reason why bento took so long. But yeah, I would hope that these two projects that Veer said they're going to do today are not going to take nearly as long.
Polysale, why do you think there are unforeseen problems? I don't think Polysale says accounting and object scale. I'm not sure that it's going to be a problem. Because you know what? The thing is, unlike other places, Second Life, we've had to account for all of these objects anyways. Now, we haven't always accounted for them great. And I'm sure we probably won't be perfect with animated objects either, but I just don't see it as a big deal.
I agree with Aura that an avatar scale slider would be really awesome.
I think it's kind of one of those things where if it's popular, it'll create problems. But it's kind of, you know, you want it to become popular. You want those problems, and, you know, you could probably fix them. I agree, Polysale, but, you know, let's look at the numbers first. We're just talking about it. We have to look at the numbers. You know, there's no point in saying, this is going to break Second Life, let's not do it. I mean, I know you're not saying that, but eventually we will get some numbers. We will get to see how all this stuff impacts everything. But I also look at it this way. Even, you know, the worst case scenario, NPCs or, you know, animated objects have this huge impact and we can only do this or that. I'll take that. You know, I'll take that over what we have.
Yeah, I think it would take at least 6 months before the animated objects come out. At least 6 months. So hopefully during that 6 months, and Linda Lab did a ton of testing on the bento bones. You know, I was in the NDA group, the non-disclosure agreement group that worked on bento, and we did a lot of tests. You know, and I know they did tests. They even hired a firm outside the company that runs tests on different graphics cards, like 300 different graphics cards, to see what the effects of the bones were going to be. So I'm hoping they would do the same amount of detailed research into animated objects, you know, to make sure that they're not going to cause a major problem. personally, I think an animated object should be pretty much cost the same as an avatar. Isn't there's a limit of how many avatars can be on a sim, right? I think it's like 25.
Well, there should definitely be a limit that, you know, in some way imposes some kind of halt to it. Because I can imagine all kinds of different things that can be res and, you know, res unlimited amounts of animated objects. So, I mean, there has to be some kind of limits.
Right, right. Oh yeah, definitely some kind of limit. And because I can see you don't want to have a nightclub owner who has 100 avatars dancing around to make their place look full, you know, with animated objects, and it having a huge impact. But yeah, I guess an agent is different than an actual avatar. Somebody was saying that they can get 100 agents on a sim, but they're not the same as 100 avatars. Got to find the balance. How much is this going to cost, so that people don't abuse it?
It can be made very efficiently. I mean, avatars have dozens and dozens of attachments and all this. An NPC wouldn't need to have all that. You could just make the model as it is, as you want it.
Correct. Yeah, and I don't think they're going to have attachment points. The NPCs. At least I hope they wouldn't, because otherwise people would dress them up like crazy to fill their
Right.
sims or their businesses, and that would just
Right.
be insane.
The cost of an avatar is mostly all the attachments people put on. I mean, I'm probably wearing shoes with 10,000 polygons right now.
Well, and that's the key point, too, that these are going to have to be pretty efficient. You know, I don't think somebody can expect to just, lay down a million polygon avatar that's going to roam around all by itself.
Right. Yeah, you have to make them efficient. And I mean, it should be that way with avatars, too, but it's not, because people like to look good.
It will be a fun thing to test, though.
My hope would be that, like I said, attachment points are for things that are not rigged. I don't think NPCs should have attachment points because people will attach all sorts of things to them. I think everything should have to have been rigged. Otherwise, you're going to have people who buy a Beleza body, and then they'll put that onto the NPC, and then if it has attachment points, then they'll buy whatever hair they have or slap that on and whatever else is on there, and soon you'll have massive NPCs walking around that are just as laggy as any avatar.
But even today, we already have things in place to stop all that from happening, even if they implement nothing else. You know, because the NPC or the animated object will be rezzed, and it's, has an impact on land impact, so, that'll stop a lot of it already. Now, what that score should be, is up in the air.
I think that's true. A Beleza body rezzed on the ground is very high land impact, so you're right that just the land impact alone will help to, as long as an NPC has the same cost as actually rezzing it on the ground versus a mesh that we wear, which doesn't have a land impact.
Well, yeah, it will have a land impact. Hopefully they don't add too much to it being rigged so that, it's unusable. I mean, I see it a lot where they give us something nice and then they nerf it all to hell.
that's the great thing about these meetings and getting a lot of feedback from content creators every Thursday, is that they'll get a much better feel for what is a reasonable limitation, what is too much, what is too little, to try to find a good balance.
I wonder if they could implement something like LODs for animation. So let's say an animation is further away, then, maybe you'd only animate the core bones, you wouldn't animate fingers, you wouldn't animate, I don't know.
The viewer seems to already do that. Yeah.
Well, if it does do that, then that would be awesome for animated objects, because if something's far away, then that animation
I think they skip
is
frames
not impacting it.
They'll become an imposter.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think they're skipping frames or something farther away. Yeah, once something's in world, you can't take it back.
Really, I don't expect animated objects to be out that quickly. I just mean more that we'll have something to play with quickly. I want to start my cat takeover of Second Life. I want to just start resin cats and have them follow me. Let's go, boys. Okay, I have to get to work. Bye, everyone. See you next week, or actually, next week we don't have a meeting. 2 weeks from now.
Alrighty, take care.
I got to get going too. Have a great weekend, everybody. See everybody in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.